Marcus Thompson wiped the sweat from his forehead as he walked through the bustling streets of London on a particularly warm Tuesday afternoon. The 34-year-old accountant had just finished another exhausting day at his office, dealing with difficult clients and mounting paperwork. His stomach growled loudly, reminding him that he had skipped lunch again due to back-to-back meetings. As he made his way toward the underground station, Marcus decided to take a small detour through the tourist area near Buckingham Palace. He had lived in London his entire life, but rarely found time to appreciate the historic landmarks that millions of visitors came to see each year. Today felt different somehow, and he wanted to clear his head before heading home to his empty apartment. The streets were packed with tourists from around the world, all eagerly snapping photos and chattering excitedly in various languages. Street performers entertained small crowds while vendors sold postcards, magnets, and other souvenirs. The atmosphere was lively and energetic, a stark contrast to the sterile office environment Marcus had just escaped. Feeling hungry and tempted by the aroma of food from nearby stalls, Marcus stopped at a small sandwich shop tucked between two souvenir stores. The elderly owner, a cheerful man with a thick Italian accent, greeted him warmly and recommended the special of the day. Within minutes, Marcus was holding a freshly made sandwich wrapped in crisp paper, filled with layers of ham, cheese, lettuce, and tomatoes. As he continued walking while eating, Marcus found himself approaching the iconic gates of Buckingham Palace. The area was crowded with tourists taking selfies and trying to get the perfect shot of the famous building. Two royal guards stood motionless at their posts, dressed in their traditional red uniforms and tall black hats, their faces expressionless, despite the chaos around them. Marcus had always been fascinated by these guards and their ability to remain completely still regardless of what happened around them. He had heard countless stories about tourists trying to make them laugh or react, but the guards were famous for their discipline and professionalism. They were trained to ignore distractions and maintain their composure no matter what. The crowd grew thicker as more people gathered to observe the guards and take photographs. Marcus found himself pressed closer to the barriers, still holding his half-eaten sandwich. A group of teenagers nearby were making silly faces and gestures at one of the guards, hoping to capture a reaction on their phones. Other tourists were calling out questions and comments, but the guard remained perfectly still, staring straight ahead. As Marcus watched the scene unfold, he couldn't help but admire the guard's dedication and self-control. The man looked young, probably in his early 20s, with sharp features and an athletic build. His uniform was impeccable, every button polished and every crease perfectly pressed. Despite the warm weather, he showed no signs of discomfort or fatigue. The crowd continued to grow, and Marcus felt himself being pushed forward by the press of bodies behind him. People were becoming increasingly animated in their attempts to get the guard's attention. Someone started clapping loudly while another person began singing. A small child even tried to climb over the barrier before being quickly pulled back by his parents. Through all of this commotion, the guard remained absolutely still, his eyes focused on a point somewhere in the distance. Marcus found himself genuinely impressed by the man's professionalism and wondered how he managed to block out all the distractions around him. It was then that Marcus realized he was still holding his sandwich, which was becoming increasingly soggy from the warm weather and his sweaty palm. The situation was about to take an unexpected turn that would change everything for both Marcus and the young royal guard standing just a few feet away. The moment that would change everything began with a simple stumble. As the crowd continued to press forward, eager to get closer to the royal guard, Marcus felt someone bump into him from behind with considerable force. The impact caught him, completely off guard, and he lurched forward, trying desperately to regain his balance. His arms flailed wildly as he fought against gravity and the momentum of the crowd. The sandwich in his right hand became a projectile, flying through the air in what seemed like slow motion. Marcus watched in horror as his lunch sailed over the protective barrier and struck the royal guard squarely in the chest, leaving a large, stain of mayonnaise, lettuce, and tomato on the pristine red uniform. The entire crowd fell silent in an instant. Hundreds of people who had been chattering, laughing, and taking photos suddenly stopped everything they were doing. The only sound was the distant hum of London traffic and the clicking of camera shutters as tourists frantically tried to capture what had just happened. Marcus felt his face turn bright red as he realized the magnitude of what had occurred. Had just thrown food at one of the Queen's guards, something that was probably considered a serious offense. His mind raced with thoughts of arrest, detention, and possible criminal charges. He had heard stories about people being prosecuted for much less serious interactions with royal property and personnel. The young guard, whose name was James Whitfield, felt the wet impact of the sandwich against his uniform, but maintained his rigid posture. Years of training had prepared him for all sorts of disruptions, from verbal taunts to physical pranks, but this was certainly unexpected. The cold mayonnaise began to seep through the fabric of his jacket, creating an uncomfortable sensation against his skin. Despite his training, James was fighting an internal battle. The absurdity of the situation was almost overwhelming. Here he was, representing centuries of British military tradition, covered in what appeared to be a ham and cheese sandwich. His fellow guard, stationed several meters away, had witnessed the entire incident but remained equally motionless, though James was certain he could see a slight twitch at the corner of his colleague's mouth. Marcus quickly composed himself and approached the barrier, his hands raised in a gesture of apology and surrender. His voice cracked slightly as he called out to the guard, "I am so incredibly sorry. It was completely accidental. Someone pushed me and I lost my balance. Please, I never meant for this to happen." The crowd began to murmur among themselves, with various tourists offering their own commentary on the situation. Some were laughing quietly, finding the whole scene amusing, while others looked genuinely concerned for Marcus and what consequences he might face. A few people were already on their phones, presumably calling friends or posting about the incident on social media. James could hear the man's sincere apology and could tell from his voice that the sandwich throwing had indeed been accidental. The genuine distress in the stranger's voice was unmistakable. As a royal guard, James had encountered his fair share of troublemakers and attention seekers, people who deliberately tried to provoke reactions or create disturbances for their own amusement. This situation felt entirely different. The pickle slice from the sandwich slowly slid down the front of James's uniform before falling to the ground with a small splat. A piece of lettuce remained stuck to one of his brass buttons, fluttering slightly in the gentle breeze. The sight was so incongruous with the dignity and formality of his position that even some of the more serious onlookers began to crack smiles. Marcus continued his stream of apologies, explaining repeatedly that it had been an accident and offering to pay for dry cleaning or any other costs associated with the incident. His genuine remorse was evident to everyone present, and several tourists began to voice their support for him, confirming that they had witnessed the accidental nature of the sandwich throwing. As the seconds ticked by, the tension in the air became almost palpable. Everyone was waiting to see how the guard would respond, if he would respond at all. Some tourists began placing bets on whether he would break protocol and acknowledge the situation, while others simply watched in fascination, unable to look away from this unprecedented scene. The moment of truth was approaching, and James Whitfield was about to make a decision that would surprise everyone present and create a story that would be talked about for years to come. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 30 seconds, something unexpected happened. The royal guard's lips began to twitch ever so slightly. The movement was almost imperceptible at first, but those closest to the barrier could see it happening. James Whitfield was fighting the biggest battle of his military career, not against an enemy or a physical threat, but against his own sense of humor. The situation had become so absurd that even his years of rigorous training couldn't completely suppress his human reaction. Here he was, covered in sandwich ingredients, while a clearly mortified man continued to apologize profusely for what was obviously an accident. The genuine concern and distress in Marcus's voice, combined with the ridiculousness of having lettuce hanging from his uniform, was breaking down James's professional composure. A small child in the crowd pointed at the guard and announced loudly, "Mummy, why does the soldier have salad on his shirt?" The innocent question sent a ripple of barely contained laughter through the gathering crowd. Even some of the more stern-looking tourists began to smile, and a few people had to cover their mouths to hide their amusement. James felt the corner of his mouth lifting slightly, and he knew he was fighting a losing battle. The training that had been drilled into him during months of preparation told him to remain motionless and ignore all distractions. But his natural human instincts were telling him that this man needed reassurance, that sometimes showing humanity was more important than following protocol to the letter. Marcus noticed the slight change in the guard's expression and felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps this wouldn't result in his arrest after all. He continued his apologies, but now included offers to help clean the uniform or replace it entirely. "Please, I feel terrible about this. I know how important your job is, and I've probably created a huge problem for you. Is there anything I can do to make this right?" The crowd was growing larger as word spread about the incident. Tourists were calling their friends over, and even some locals had stopped to see what all the commotion was about. Camera phones were recording from every angle, and Marcus realized that this moment was being captured and would probably end up on the internet within hours. James could feel the eyes of hundreds of people on him, all waiting to see what he would do next. His training officer's voice echoed in his mind, reminding him of the importance of maintaining dignity and composure at all times. Royal Guards were symbols of British tradition and military excellence, and any deviation from protocol could have serious consequences for his career. But as he looked at Marcus, who was clearly suffering from embarrassment and genuine worry about the situation he had accidentally created, James felt his resolve weakening further. The man posed no threat, showed obvious respect for the institution, and was clearly a decent person who had simply had an unfortunate accident in a crowded space. A piece of tomato chose that moment to slide down from James's collar and land on his highly polished boot. The sight was so comical that several people in the crowd could no longer contain their laughter. The sound of suppressed giggles and chuckles filled the air, creating an atmosphere that was far more relaxed than anyone would have expected given the circumstances. James made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. Very slowly and deliberately, he moved his eyes from their fixed forward position and looked directly at Marcus. The crowd gasped collectively at this break in protocol, but James wasn't finished. He then did something that no one could have predicted. The Royal Guard smiled. Not a smirk or a slight upturn of the lips, but a genuine, warm, human smile that transformed his entire face. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, with many people laughing with relief and delight at the unexpected display of humanity from someone they had assumed was more statue than person. But James wasn't done surprising everyone. He was about to do something that would make this moment truly unforgettable and show the world that sometimes the most powerful response to an awkward situation is simple human kindness and understanding. What happened next would be talked about for years to come and would forever change how people viewed the Royal Guards. James Whitfield, still smiling warmly at Marcus, slowly reached up with his white-gloved hand and carefully picked the piece of lettuce off his brass button. Instead of disposing of it with annoyance or anger, he held it up for everyone to see, examining it with mock seriousness as if it were a precious artifact. The crowd watched in amazement as the guard then pretended to consider eating the lettuce, bringing it halfway to his mouth before pausing dramatically. The gesture sent the entire gathering into fits of laughter and applause. Even the other Royal Guard, who had maintained his position throughout the incident, was clearly struggling not to break character as his shoulders shook slightly with suppressed laughter. James then looked directly at Marcus and spoke, his voice carrying clearly across the now silent crowd. "Well, sir, I must say this is the first time anyone has brought me lunch while I'm on duty, though next time I'd prefer if you could manage to keep it in the wrapper." His words were delivered with perfect timing and a distinctly British sense of humor that had everyone laughing even harder. Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him so powerful that his knees nearly buckled. The guard's response was so unexpected, so perfectly pitched between professionalism and humanity, that he couldn't help but laugh along with everyone else. "I promise to work on my sandwich-carrying technique," he replied, his voice shaking slightly with a mixture of relief and amusement. The interaction continued as James noticed Marcus's obvious distress despite the laughter. With genuine concern, in his voice he added, "You look like you've had quite a shock there. Are you all right? I hope you don't think I'm going to have you arrested for assault with a deadly sandwich." The joke brought another round of laughter from the crowd, but Marcus could hear the kindness beneath the humor. What made the moment even more special was James's decision to step slightly out of his rigid position, maintaining his post, but adopting a more relaxed stance that allowed for easier conversation. This small adjustment showed the crowd that he was still on duty and professional, but was choosing to handle the situation with grace and understanding rather than strict adherence to protocol. A tourist from Australia called out, "That's the most human thing I've ever seen a royal guard do." Others in the crowd began sharing their own stories about visiting London and always wondering what the guards were thinking behind their stoic expressions. The incident had somehow transformed what could have been an embarrassing disaster into a moment of genuine connection between the guard, Marcus, and the diverse group of onlookers. James took advantage of this teachable moment to explain a bit about his role. "People often think we can't hear or see what's happening around us, but we're very much aware of everything. We're trained to maintain our composure, but that doesn't mean we don't appreciate a good laugh when the situation calls for it." His words helped the crowd understand that the guards were real people with personalities and emotions, not just decorative fixtures. A small girl who had been watching the entire scene with wide eyes approached the barrier and asked James, "Are you really a soldier?" His face lit up as he knelt down to her level, careful to keep his uniform away from the remaining sandwich debris on the ground. "I am indeed a soldier, and my job is to protect some very important people and places. But that doesn't mean I can't be friendly to visitors like you and your family." The child then asked the question that everyone was thinking. "Did that sandwich hurt when it hit you?" James chuckled and replied, "Not at all. Though I think my uniform might need a good cleaning. The tomato was particularly well aimed." His ability to maintain humor while reassuring the child demonstrated exactly why his response had resonated so strongly with everyone present. As the crowd began to disperse, many people approached to thank both Marcus and James for creating such a memorable and heartwarming moment. Several tourists mentioned that this would be their favorite story from their London vacation, and that they would remember the kind royal guard who chose humanity over rigid protocol when faced with an unexpected situation. As the immediate excitement began to die down, Marcus realized that he couldn't simply walk away from this situation. The guard's incredible kindness and humor had turned what could have been his worst day into something unexpectedly wonderful, but he still felt responsible for the mess he had created. He approached the barrier once more and addressed James directly. "I know you've been incredibly gracious about this whole thing, but I really want to make sure there aren't any consequences for you because of my accident," Marcus said earnestly. "Is there someone I should speak to, or some way I can ensure that you don't get in trouble for breaking protocol? The last thing I want is for your kindness to cost you your job." James was touched by Marcus's continued concern for his well-being. Most people who interacted with the guards, whether positively or negatively, rarely considered the potential consequences the guards might face for deviating from standard procedures. "That's very thoughtful of you to consider," James replied. "Don't worry too much about it. My supervisors are reasonable people, and I think they'll understand that sometimes human decency trumps rigid protocol. What neither Marcus nor the remaining crowd knew was that James's commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, had been discreetly observing the situation from a nearby security station. He had watched the entire incident unfold on the surveillance cameras and had been making his way through the crowd to assess the situation firsthand. Rather than intervening immediately, he had chosen to see how his guardsmen would handle the unexpected challenge. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison approached, just as James was reassuring Marcus about potential consequences. The crowd, noticing the approach of an obviously senior military officer, fell silent again, unsure of what would happen next. Marcus felt his anxiety spike once more, certain that the arrival of a superior officer meant trouble for the kind guard who had handled the situation so beautifully. "Guard Whitfield!" the lieutenant colonel said in a clear, authoritative voice that carried across the immediate area. James immediately snapped back to attention, his moment of relaxed interaction clearly over. "Sir!" he responded crisply, his training taking over automatically despite the unusual circumstances. The lieutenant colonel surveyed the scene, taking in the sandwich debris on the ground, the stains on James's uniform, and the expectant faces of the tourists who remained to witness this final chapter of an already remarkable story. His expression was unreadable, and Marcus found himself holding his breath, worried that his accident was about to cause serious problems for the guard who had shown him such unexpected kindness. "Guard Whitfield, would you care to explain why you appear to have been in combat with what looks like a ham and cheese sandwich?" the lieutenant colonel asked, his voice stern but with just the slightest hint of amusement that only James, with his years of experience with the man, could detect. "Sir, a member of the public accidentally lost control of his lunch due to crowding, and it made contact with my uniform. I assessed the situation and determined that the individual posed no security threat and was genuinely distressed by the accident. I made a judgment call to handle the situation with understanding rather than strict protocol adherence, sir." The lieutenant colonel nodded slowly, then turned to address Marcus directly. "And you, sir, are the gentleman responsible for feeding my guardsmen?" Marcus swallowed hard and nodded. "Yes, sir. It was completely accidental, and I've been trying to apologize and make sure there are no negative consequences for your soldier." He handled the situation with incredible professionalism and kindness. Several tourists in the remaining crowd began to speak up in support of both Marcus and James, explaining to the lieutenant colonel how they had witnessed the accidental nature of the incident and praising the guard's response. An elderly woman from Canada stepped forward and said, "Officer, that young man represented your country beautifully today. He turned what could have been an embarrassing incident into something that showed the world the best of British character." The lieutenant colonel listened to the various testimonials from the crowd, his expression gradually softening. He could see that this incident had actually created tremendous goodwill toward the royal guards and had demonstrated exactly the kind of judgment and character he hoped to see in his soldiers when faced with unexpected situations. After considering everything he had heard and observed, the lieutenant colonel was ready to deliver his verdict on how this unusual situation would be resolved. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison surveyed the scene one final time before speaking, his decision already made, but wanting to ensure he addressed everyone who had been part of this extraordinary incident. The remaining crowd waited in tense silence, tourists from around the world holding their breath to see how this uniquely British moment would conclude. "Guard Whitfield," the lieutenant colonel began, his voice carrying the authority of years of military service. "In my 25 years of overseeing Royal Guard operations, I have seen many unusual situations. I have seen guards maintain their composure through protests, pranks, and all manner of distractions. But what I witnessed today was something far more valuable than mere adherence to protocol." James remained at attention, but Marcus could see the slight tension in his shoulders as he waited for his superior's judgment. The lieutenant colonel continued, You demonstrated exactly the kind of judgment, humanity, and leadership that we hope to instill in our guardsmen. You assessed a situation, recognized that it required a human response rather than rigid protocol, and you handled it with dignity, humor, and kindness. The crowd began to smile as they realized the direction of the lieutenant colonel's words. He turned to address Marcus and the remaining tourists. As for you, sir, your concern for Guard Whitfield's well-being and your genuine remorse over an obvious accident speak well of your character. And to all of you who witnessed this incident, you've seen something that perfectly represents what our royal guards truly are. Highly trained professional soldiers who are also decent human beings. The lieutenant colonel then surprised everyone by reaching into his jacket and pulling out a handkerchief, which he offered to James to help clean the remaining sandwich residue from his uniform. Guard Whitfield, I believe you have about 10 minutes left in your current rotation. When you're relieved, please report to my office, not for disciplinary action, but because I'd like to discuss using this incident as a training example for new recruits about appropriate judgment and public relations. The crowd erupted in spontaneous applause, with many people calling out congratulations to James and expressing their admiration for the lieutenant colonel's handling of the situation. Marcus felt tears of relief and gratitude welling up in his eyes, overwhelmed by the unexpected outcome of what had started as his worst nightmare. As the lieutenant colonel prepared to leave, he had one final surprise. He approached Marcus and handed him a small card. Sir, this is an invitation to attend a changing of the guard ceremony next month as our guest. I think after today's adventure, you deserve to see how we do things when we're not dodging sandwiches. The gesture brought laughter and more applause from the crowd. The story didn't end there, however. Within hours, videos and photos of the incident had spread across social media platforms worldwide. The hashtag #SandwichGuard began trending, with millions of people sharing the story and praising both James's response and Marcus's genuine concern for the guard's well-being. News outlets picked up the story, and it became a positive international news story about kindness, humanity, and good judgment. Marcus and James exchanged contact information before parting ways, beginning what would become a genuine friendship. James later revealed that the incident had actually enhanced his career rather than harming it, as his superiors appreciated his demonstration of good judgment under pressure. He eventually became a training instructor, using the sandwich incident as an example of how to balance protocol with human decency. The sandwich shop where Marcus had purchased his ill-fated lunch decided to capitalize on their unexpected fame by creating the Royal Guard Special, a sandwich identical to the one that had started it all. They donated a portion of the proceeds from each sandwich sold to military charities, turning the accident into an ongoing source of support for service members and their families. Years later, both Marcus and James would tell their children and grandchildren about the day a simple accident became a lesson in kindness, understanding, and the power of responding to unexpected situations with grace and humor. The incident became legendary among Royal Guard units, proving that sometimes the most memorable moments come not from perfect adherence to rules, but from knowing when humanity should take precedence over protocol. The story of the man who threw a sandwich at a Royal Guard became a reminder that even in the most formal and traditional institutions, there is always room for compassion, laughter, and the simple human connection that makes life meaningful.